Welcome, Florida Club Managers Association. This is Tommy Spalding, your host. Today is a special day. It is our third of our sixth speaker for our Heart-Led Leader webinar series. And we just want to welcome all the club leaders throughout Florida and thank my partner in crime, Beth Sargent, for doing this 6-part series of Heart-Led Leader webinar. I'm in Seattle, Washington today. Had to get up at 5 o'clock this morning, worked out, so we get on the call at 7 o'clock this morning Pacific time. The reason why I'm in Seattle is I surprised my wife, Jill. Those that know me well know that Jill is a huge Beatles fan, and I surprised her because Paul McCartney was in concert on Monday night. So we flew out here, went to the concert. He's 79 years old, just rocked it for 3 hours. It was unbelievable. We found out he's staying at the same hotel as us. So yesterday we had a great little run-in with him in the lobby where my wife got to say hello, and that just made her day. And he was just the most gracious person. And speaking of Paul McCartney, who's 79 years old and still rocking it, he's what they call a modern elder. And that's how I'm going to introduce my friend, Chip Conley, who is the world's greatest modern elder coach. Chip Conley actually has a hospitality background, and he's the first of all our speakers. We've been doing this Heart-Led Leader webinar series for almost 3 years now, over 30 different thought leaders, CEOs, and New York Times bestselling authors and all that. And Chip's been those New York Times bestselling author and CEO, but he has a great hospitality background. Quick story on Chip. I met him through our dear friend, Liz Wiseman, who wrote Multipliers, and Liz is a huge fan of Chip's, and Chip has presented at our Heart-Led Leader retreats before, and I got to know his heart. He's just an incredible man of wisdom and just a genuine heart to help serve others. Chip, about 26 years ago, he bought a beat up inner city, motel, and he turned this motel into the second most successful boutique hotel chain in North America. And in 26 years, built something incredible in the hospitality business. When he retired or left that business, he met the CEO of Airbnb. And Airbnb 10 years ago was just kind of getting off the ground. And Airbnb was smart enough, this young CEO, to see the wisdom and the strength that Chip Conley had, and hired him basically to run all strategic planning and visionary, but basically be his coach. And so for the last 10 years, Chip has really helped take Airbnb to where it is now, the greatest hospitality, company in the world. Chip has written 5 books. The 2 that I love the most are Peak, which he's going to talk about today, which is peak performance. But then he's also spending his days really building this thing called Wisdom at Work, making of a modern elder. And just a little snapshot on that is, a lot of companies, a lot of clubs have 5 generations that work in our industry. And in Japan, we kind of admire our elders and we learn from them. In America, we spit them out. And so Chip is really trying to build an institute called the Modern Elder Academy in Mexico, where he really builds the modern day elder. He'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. But we want to welcome Chip to the Heart-Led Leader webinar series. We're going to do like a 35-minute talk with Chip. And then Chip is going to take questions for about 15, 25 minutes. So if you have a question, you can text me on my cell phone, 720-219-3050, or better yet, just raise your hand in the session or on the chat session. Just ask a question in the chat and I'll write them down. Thank you, Chip, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Tommy. It's an honor to be with you, and especially hanging out with a bunch of other hospitality leaders. So let me share my screen, and we will pull this up here, and I'll do the presentation. Let's actually, got some mosquitoes down here. Okay, how do I get this to, this is in its way, there we go, play. All right, so as Tommy mentioned, I'm going to present my philosophy of leadership and what works and what doesn't. As Tommy said, for 24 years, I was the founder and CEO of Joie de Vivre, which had 52 boutique hotels around California, second largest after Kimpton in the US. sold it. It's now a Hyatt brand. And I sold it in 2010. And yeah, it was 2 years later after that I got a call from this guy, Brian Chesky, who I'd never heard of, and his little company with his two co-founders, Nate and Joe, called Airbnb. And I was like, that's a terrible idea, Brian. That's never going to fly. I was wrong. But Brian asked me Brian had read my book, Peak, the book which the presentation is going to be focused on that today. And he said, we want to be a peak company someday. And, everybody from John Mackey at Whole Foods Markets to, the late Tony Hsieh, God rest his soul, who had Zappos, to a number of other well-known leaders, Southwest Airlines, have used the peak model to look at how they create a hierarchy of needs for their employees, their customers, and even their investors. So the subtitle is How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow. So I'm going to give you a little psychology lesson today, based upon what I've learned along the way. All right, so let's get started. Okay. The most neglected fact in business is that we're all human. Now, it's partly a neglected fact because of the fact that often we get very fixated with our balance sheets and our strategic plans and the numbers of our business. And we forget that at the end of the day, a great company, especially if it's a hospitality company, is really driven by great humans and humans who are living up to their potential in the workplace. So the question I like to ask myself, along the way, as I was a CEO of my own company for 24 years, I'm CEO again of now the Modern Elder Academy, which I'll talk about today, is what's your operating system for understanding humans? Because quite frankly, most of us don't have an operating system for understanding humans. We just sort of like operate as if it's innate how we understand ourselves and others. And yet I found that as a leader, having an actual format for thinking about leading other humans helped me to better articulate to my mid-level managers how they can be better leaders as well. So it's a tale of two companies. My company, Joie de Vivre, which started in 1987, and Airbnb as well, which, as Tommy said, for those who don't know it, now Airbnb has been controversial because it's a disruptor, that's for sure. It was very hard. I still own 10 hotels. I sold my company, but I still own 10 hotels. So it was really hard initially to be the head of, helping Airbnb grow into an international hospitality brand while also still being a hotelier. But today, Airbnb is over $100 billion company. It's worth more than Marriott and Hilton combined. The most recent quarterly earnings came out yesterday and we're off the charts positive, which is unusual because Airbnb made a recovery in the pandemic way faster than the hotel industry did. So it's an interesting company, and it's a company that was built upon the principles I will be presenting to you today. So first of all, Joie de Vivre had 52 boutique hotels all around California. I basically started the company when I was 26 years old, at the early stages of the boutique hotel movement in the United States. And then Airbnb, with 7 million listings around the world, is the largest hospitality operator in the world today. Actually, they're not a hospitality operator. Let's be honest. It's a hospitality brand with the operations being led by hosts, which I can talk about because that's complicated. How do you lead a hospitality company when the people delivering the hospitality are not your employees? I have always appreciated a theory that I learned when I was at Stanford Business School, and it came from Harvard Business School, and it was called the service profit chain. The idea behind it was if you create a unique corporate culture, by the way, given the title of your speaker series, Heart-Led Leadership, I mean, this is sort of a very appropriate slide. So if you create a great culture, a unique corporate culture, what that tends to lead to is enthusiastic staff. If you're enthusiastic employees, are very loyal to you, that leads to customer loyalty because the customers feel the love from the employees. That leads to market share growth, more profitability, because frankly, you have to spend less on marketing if you have very high customer satisfaction. And then you've built a sustainable business model and you can invest back in the unique corporate culture. John Mackey at Whole Foods calls this Chip's virtuous circle. I call it karmic capitalism because a media person for the Stanford magazine once put me on the cover and said, the art of karmic capitalism, and it was my story. Karmic capitalism means what goes around comes around. And that's really what this is showing. What goes around comes around. You create a great culture, you invest in your employees, and it leads to loyal customers, and ultimately the investors are well cared for. So this is meant to be a dark slide on purpose, because I want to tell you my challenging story. This was a long time ago now. This is more than 20 years ago. If you remember the dot-com bust and 9/11, at that time, 20 years ago, we had, what was a dot-com boom became a bust. And given at that time, all of our hotels were in the San Francisco Bay Area, we were very vulnerable. We saw 50% drop in revenues for our Silicon Valley hotels over 4 years and a 35% drop for our San Francisco hotels. We also had, 9/11, which meant people didn't want to travel much. We also had Sars, and SARS, was something way before we knew a pandemic like the one we're in right now. We're just coming out of. The bottom line is SARS led to 90% reduction in international travel from Asia. And the number one travel destination in the US 20 years ago was the San Francisco Bay Area for Asian travelers. And then we had all kinds of other things going on. We had a slight recession, et cetera. So basically, I was in a very difficult position in 2001, 2, 3. And so I decided one day to go to a local bookstore, Borders bookstore, that no longer exists on Union Square in San Francisco. And I went looking for a book that would help me. And I started in the business section of the bookstore, but I quickly moved to the self-help section of the bookstore, the psychology section. And I ran across this guy, Abraham Maslow, not him personally, but I ran across him and his books. And I took only one psychology class in college. I went to Stanford undergrad and Stanford Business School. And in my one class, I do remember Maslow was the guy who focused on best practices in human behavior as opposed to worst practices. Freud and Skinner and a bunch of others looked at sort of the challenges people had, the neuroses they had. Where Maslow said, listen, what if we were to actually look for self-actualizing people who are being all they can be? In fact, the US Army's ad campaign of many years ago, Be All You Can Be, came from Maslow, interestingly enough. So he ultimately created this hierarchy of needs that he's most famous for. The idea that we have base needs, physiological needs, but once they're partially met, you move up the pyramid. You have safety needs. Once those are partially met, you move up to social belonging needs, esteem needs. And at the peak of the pyramid is this idea of peak experiences and self-actualization, being all you can be. Well, so I'm reading Maslow. So first of all, I was reading these books on the floor of Borders bookstore, like 2 hours. And finally the store manager came along and said, hey, Sonny, are you going to buy some books here? And I was like, okay, yeah, I will. And so I bought 2 or 3 of his books, took them home over the next 2 or 3 weeks, read them. And I was really intrigued. I was intrigued by the fact that what if, first of all, my company only had 4 months of payroll still available to it. We were running out of cash. And so we were sort of, and there was an article in the San Francisco Chronicle talking about, which hospitality companies are most at risk due to the dot-com bust. And we were number 1 on the list. So I said to my senior leaders, what if we took Maslow's pyramid and just transformed it into what I call the transformation pyramid? The idea that we have survival needs, which address the first 2 levels of Maslow's pyramid. We have succeed needs, which address levels 3 and 4. And then we have transformation needs. When we feel in a transformational state, we often are feeling self-actualized, being all we can be. And I said, what if we applied this new pyramid of just 3 levels to our three most important constituents or stakeholders. So I'm going to go through those quickly. First with the employee pyramid. Now the employee pyramid is the one that I really care for the most because quite frankly, it's the one that came the easiest for me. There, you'll see there's three pyramids, one for the employees, one for the customers, one for investors. And investors also, if you're club managers, you may not have investors, you might have an owner, or you might have, frankly, the members, your members who are, or a board of directors that you're accountable to. But let's start with this employee pyramid. So the survival need for employees is the compensation package. It's money. But money is not the number one reason people leave their job in the United States. It's actually fourth place. The number one reason people leave their job in the US is because of their boss. So people join a company, but they leave their boss. And so when someone actually is focused exclusively on money, it tends to be a job and it creates sort of base motivation, but it doesn't necessarily create loyalty. Loyalty is created the next level up. And like next level up speaks to when a person feels successful in their work, they think of it as a career often. They feel recognized as if their boss appreciates them and recognizes them for what they do. They're offered learning and development programs that help them feel like there's a career path for them here. And as such, they are more loyal. So people are less loyal to a company. They're more loyal to the people in a company. And that's why this one, as we move up the pyramid, we go to more of a human-centric approach to, it's not just the commodity of money, it's the relationships we build together. But if you want to actually create a company that is going to be a disruptor or going to be best in class or basically steal market share from competitors or have the highest customer satisfaction and employee satisfaction, you move to this third level, which is meaning. When you actually create a sense of meaning for your employees, they often move from job to career to feeling a sense of calling and feel an avocation of what they're doing, which creates more inspiration. So how do you do that? Let me tell you a quick story. I'll never forget this. This was, this was during the Great Recession. And I was on a Southwest Airlines plane. Southwest Airlines is my favorite airline in the sense that it's not the one I always use because I like first class. I like things like that too. But I use it a lot because I actually really appreciate the culture. I appreciate the people and the flight attendants especially. So long story short is I was on a plane somewhere in the South flying on Southwest. And here was this guy walking down the aisle handing out, not peanuts, but because they used to hand out peanuts, that now it's just like a little snack. And he didn't look like a flight attendant. He wasn't dressed like a flight attendant. I was like, okay, well, this guy may be paying for his flight by just doing some flight attendant duties. But as I actually looked at him more closely, he was in the Southwest Airlines magazine, which is called Spirit, and his name was Gary Kelly. He was the CEO. And interestingly, previously, Herb Kelleher, who was for 37 years the CEO of Southwest Airlines, he was my mentor from afar. So I never met the man. He's passed away, unfortunately now, but I would write him once a year and he would give me advice. It was like a pen pal who happens to be the CEO of Southwest Airlines. So Gary, I see him in the back of the plane. No one's talking to him. And I looked at him and I said, this was the Great Recession. I said, yeah, it's really punishing the airlines, isn't it? He said, yeah, this is terrible. I don't know. We've never seen anything like this at Southwest. And so I asked him something because in like a day or two prior, there had been an article in the Wall Street Journal that said that Southwest Airlines was the only major airline in the United States that was not charging for the bags. If you recall back then, Bags Fly Free was their ad campaign. And so I said to him, like, why are you not charging for the bags? The Wall Street Journal says that you're leaving $500 million on the table by not charging for the bags. And he said, well, why do you think we're not charging? And I was like, well, yeah, you have, it seems like you have an ad campaign now. So I guess it's a differentiator for your customers. He said, that's true, Chip, but that's not the primary reason we did it. I said, okay, well, what is it? And he pointed to the flight attendants. And this relates to this pyramid. He pointed to the flight attendants and he said, we hire flight attendants who love service, who feel a sense of calling and meaning. These are the words he used with me. And of course, this was a few years after I'd already created this. So I felt very proud that he was using that language. He said, we hire people for their calling, and their calling is they love being in the service business. They love smiling. They love building a relationship with our customers in the air. The moment United Airlines and other airlines decided to force their flight attendants to become baggage handlers, because everybody, when all the airlines started charging for bags, people brought all their bags on the plane. So what that led to is flight attendants not having much time to talk to and be friendly to guests, nor to serve them some water before we fly. They're just like crazy stressed trying to figure out how to get some of the baggage from in the plane to under the plane into the hull of the plane, because that was what was happening. And he said, what people didn't recognize is that on-time performance is the number one indicator of customer loyalty. And on-time performance in the airline industry in 2008, 9, and 10 fell apart, except to Southwest Airlines. And so what he said is, the reason we did not, start charging for bags was, yes, it led to an ad campaign of bags fly free. Yes, it kept our on-time performance the best in the industry, which led to loyalty. But at the end of the day, our flight attendants are so much happier and have a sense of calling in their work because I didn't get in their way by forcing them to become baggage handlers. And he said, the most important thing a leader can ever do is to actually focus on how do you create the conditions for people to do their best work. And I was like, oh, wow. Can I, I'd like to tape this right now. And I told him then about my relationship with Herb Kelleher, and we had a great conversation. So that's just an example. And I would say that Southwest Airlines is a company that historically has not just had a pyramid, it's maybe had a square, because it might have had as many people who had a calling as had a job. But generally in most companies, the pyramid shape makes sense. You're welcome to ask questions about this when we go to Q&A. So let's talk about the fact that here's 3 different kinds of employees in a hotel. Their relationship with their work, what gives them a sense of calling or meaning, may be very different. This is, in our hotel companies, we actually took it down to the point, like we realized that, you can't monolithically talk about employees and their sense, what gives them a sense of meaning across all job functions. So the first person on the left is someone on the front desk. We call our front desk clerks hosts. So it's a host. What gives our hosts, the greatest sense of calling and meaning is building a relationship with the guests. So one of the things we did in that .com bust area is we had a once a month staff meeting with all of our staff. We were doing that before, but we actually brought in 2 guests for every staff meeting, so the guests could talk about why they love the hotel. Wouldn't that be interesting at your clubs if you had staff meetings where you brought in some of your members who just are some of the raving fans of what you're doing, and you had them talk for 3 to 5 minutes about why they love the club, why they love it so much, and ask them. It's not hard to get people to do this, by the way. They actually appreciate it because it's their way to give back to the staff. Ask them to mention 2 or 3 staff people by name. So our front desk hosts love that. Now for the housekeepers, the second in the middle here, what they loved that as well, but they didn't build as close of a relationship necessarily with our guests. What they appreciated was the relationship they were creating with other hosts. About 90 to 95% of our housekeeping staff were immigrants. And so what they loved is once a month, they got to do a potluck where each of the housekeeping staff brought in food from their home country where they were from. And they had sort of like a little, international potluck. And that was what actually gave them a sense of meaning, is then telling stories about, Poland or El Salvador or Vietnam or wherever they were from. And giving the other people at the housekeeping staff the sense that we're a community and we get to know each other. And then for the bartenders on the right, well, you know what they want? They want money. They want tips. they're pretty money driven. In fact, that pyramid might be like 80% is money, and then the other two levels of recognition and meaning are 10% each. But you know what the bartenders loved, and we put it in place again during the depths of that downturn. What they loved was the fact that we put in place. We had lots of extra rooms during the recession of that time. As we said, if you're an employee in good standing, once a quarter you get 2 free nights at any of our hotels. You can just go there with your spouse or best friend or whatever, and you basically have a free trip somewhere, and you just get to stay in one of our hotels and give us some feedback on what's working and what's not working in the hotel. So the bartenders love that. So long story short is, as you look at that pyramid, look at it from the perspective of sometimes in different job functions, people will have different senses of meaning. All right, let's go to the customer pyramid. So the customer pyramid, again, 3 levels: survival at the base, success in the middle, transformation or transform at the top. I don't care whether you're a dry cleaner or a defense contractor, the base of the pyramid is please meet my expectations as a customer. That's the survival need for a customer is I had an expectation and you met them. You maybe didn't exceed them, but at least you met them, because disappointment equals expectations minus reality. And you want your expectations to be at least equal to a reality, be at least equal to your expectations. Back in the old days, pre-internet, frankly, you could build that customer satisfaction, as you see on the right-hand side there, create satisfaction. And that was enough for someone to stay loyal to you. But in the internet era, the customer became more promiscuous. There are more choices that they can find online of other things, other companies that actually meet those needs. So the middle of this pyramid is desires. So if you actually move up one level, you move from expectations of a customer to the desires of a customer. A customer who has their desires met is more likely to be committed. And then at the top of the pyramid, you have unrecognized needs. Now, I write in the book, in chapter 9 of my book, Peak, How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow. I go into a lot of depth on this, and we don't have time to go into it now. But what I will say is that great companies, not just hospitality companies, think of Apple. Apple didn't do a focus group in order to figure out how to create the iPhone. And Steve Jobs, in fact, didn't love focus groups because Steve Jobs said quite famously, that will only tell me the desires of my customers. It won't tell me he didn't say unrecognized needs, but paraphrasing him, it wouldn't teach me anything about their unrecognized needs. So understanding the psychology of your customer such that you're addressing their needs that they don't even maybe know that they have, can lead to customers that are evangelical supporters of yours. I think we might have we have a video here. So that ad campaign ran during the Super Bowl about 5 years ago. Now, when I joined Airbnb, and they really wanted to, use the peak model, I said, okay, we got to figure out what's at the peak of the pyramid for our customers. What's the base of the pyramid? Expectations. What's the desires, and what's at the top? And as we did our own deep dive, and what we came to was this idea that what was at the peak of the pyramid was, how do we help people belong anywhere, feel like they're accepted anywhere in the world, and that they belong anywhere? And so ultimately, we looked at creating a business model based upon belonging anywhere, and ultimately took out a Super Bowl ad on it. It had a lot to do with, I think, why Airbnb grew into the company the size it is. Oops. Well, I'm gonna go to this next slide. The investor pyramid, which you see here, you see the employee pyramid on the lower left, the customer pyramid at the top, and the investor pyramid in the bottom right. I'll just say briefly, the investor pyramid is particularly relevant when you're an entrepreneur and you have investors. For you, it might be, your board of directors, who are the people you are answerable to, because it's often who the leader of an organization is answerable to. The transaction alignment means at the base, what's the survival need? What defines, what we consider, effective leadership, and the metrics that define success. Relationship alignment speaks to this idea of, you have a deeper connection with your board of directors or your investors, such that they would invest in you even if you were doing something beyond what you're currently doing with them. And then a legacy investor or a board of directors that looked at the legacy is moving beyond just short-term transactional results. It's looking toward the long term. So these are the three pyramids together. Now, to be honest with you, when I was working on this model for my company, for Joie de Vivre, back in 2002 and 2003, as the model that was going to help us get through, and we did. Ultimately, 80% of our hotels gained market share during the period from 2001 to 2005. We lost no hotels. We had no hotels go into bankruptcy. All of our leading competitors lost, Ian Schrager and Bill Kimpton lost, between the two companies, 8 hotels to bankruptcy or foreclosure. We didn't lose any. So the model worked for sure. But I was going out and talking about it then. I wasn't sure I was going to write a book yet, but I was giving a speech to a bunch of Fortune 500 company leaders. And there was a woman in the back of the room who saw this model that you're seeing on the screen right now. And there was a space in the middle. And the space in the middle, I used to say, I think, the empowered company or something like that. And she was shouting at me from the back. She's from Ford Motor Company. She said, "You dummy, the heart goes in the middle. The heart goes in the middle." And she was right. And I hadn't really thought about that. But we created this idea of the service profit chain back in 1997, about 10 years after I started the company, when I was looking at how are we growing the company. And then the rest of this model got introduced to our company in 2002 or 2003. And interestingly enough, the heart in the center is really fascinating, because if you look at the enthusiastic staff part of the heart, which is number 2 on the heart, it's exactly next to the employee pyramid. The top of the heart, customer loyalty, is right next to the customer pyramid. And the profitable and sustainable business part of the heart is right next to the investor pyramid. So this is a holistic model that works. And if it's working properly, the heart is beating, and it all works in a holistic kind of way. So let's go to the next slide. Here's a bunch of companies that literally have used Maslow consciously in their strategic planning and how they operate their businesses. Of course, Airbnb is there. Southwest is there. Harley Davidson. WeWork, I should probably take off this slide. Just, they definitely have used it. I'm not sure it helped them a whole lot. Apple, Zappos, Facebook, Pinterest, and Whole Foods. And there's a bunch of other companies as well. So for those of you who are looking at this and saying, Chip, I am very skeptical that a model based upon psychology makes any sense in the business world. Well, this was an article that came out 10 years ago, not just an article, it was actually a whole issue in the Harvard Business Review on the value of happiness, how employee well-being drives profits. And it really spoke to, and in fact, even referred to the peak model, and said that when companies create a great culture that leads to employee satisfaction and loyalty, you create sustainable profits in the long term. This is the book, Peak, How Great Companies Get Their Mojo from Maslow. It's 15 years since this book came out, but there was a revised edition and put in paperback about 4 years ago. So it's been updated, and there's a whole section at the end of the book also on what it takes to be a peak leader, because the model is about how to create a peak organization, but how do you become a peak leader as well? So I believe that creating peak experiences for your employees, customers, and investors creates peak performance. So I hope that you'll all seek the peak. And you see the chipconley.com and my Twitter account, but I'm also on LinkedIn. You can find me there. So let me just finish with a couple additional thoughts. And actually, I'm gonna get rid of the screen share here. Where is that? There we go. Stop screen share. Oops. Okay. There we go. So let me just wrap by saying a couple things. I've learned with my own experience that the peak model works. I now applied it because at Airbnb, they called me the modern elder, which I wasn't really happy about at first because I was twice the age of the average employee there. I'm now 61 and a half. But I was like, okay, when I was 52, I joined them and the average age was 26. But they said, Chip, you're a modern elder, and a modern elder is as curious as they are wise. So in my 7.5 years helping Airbnb, 4 years full-time, 3.5 years as the primary strategic advisor to the founders, what I learned was like, okay, we have a need in society of, as Tommy said in the introduction, of helping people to see how to create more intergenerational collaboration in the workplace and elevate people's voices, frankly, who are in midlife and beyond, who've built some wisdom along the way. So I decided to create the world's first midlife wisdom school. It's called the Modern Elder Academy. Our first campus is on a beachfront on the Pacific Ocean in southern Baja, about an hour north of Cabo. And our second and third locations are going to be in the Santa Fe, New Mexico area, where we have a 2,600 acre ranch, as well as it's just outside of Santa Fe, and then a 12.5 acre exceptional Catholic retreat center and seminary that we've purchased, and it's right next door to St. John's College, and we'll be opening there as well. So you can learn more about the Modern Elder Academy. It's for those of you who are, I'd say 45 and older. It's particularly helpful to actually help from the perspective of how do you cultivate and harvest your wisdom, as well as how do you look at repurposing yourself, even in your current career, or we're living longer on average. Our average age of the person who comes to the Modern Elder Academy is 54. The average age they think they're going to live till is 90. And that's not that far off, probably for some of them. So if you're 54 years old and you're living till 90, you have 36 years of adulthood ahead of you, and you have 36 years of adulthood behind you. So at age 54, if you live till 90, you are exactly halfway through your adult life if you start counting at 18, which is when adulthood starts. Most of us don't think that way. Most of us think like, okay, at 54, I'm sort of on the downslide and there's not much left, but the truth is, when you have that point of view, it actually has a huge impact on your mortality and frankly, your happiness. There's a book that came out last month called Breaking the Age Code by a Yale professor named Becca Levy that showed when people actually shift from a negative to a positive perspective on aging, they get 7.5 years of additional life, which is more life gained than if they actually at age 50 stopped smoking or started exercising. So, changing your perspective on aging, reframing that mindset has a huge impact on not just your happiness, but how long you live as well. So I'm going to now open it up, bring maybe Tommy back on and open it up for Q&A, and we'll see what questions come up.
All right. Chip, if I can first of all, if I can just start off the questions. You said something in your presentation that just blew my mind, that Airbnb is bigger than Hyatt Corporation and Marriott Starwood Corporation combined.
Actually, they're bigger than Marriott. As of about 3 months ago, they were bigger. Airbnb was bigger than Marriott, Hilton, Hyatt, Intercontinental, and Four Seasons combined. Now it's just Marriott and Hilton combined, the two biggest
Okay. So walk us through that. How much of it is just a great kick-ass idea? And how much is it just the timing, marketplace, execution, culture? Just walk us through that story. It's just an incredible story that you really helped create.
Sure. So, actually, Tommy, why don't we have you mute? That'd be great. So it's an interesting. When I was approached by the founders 10 years ago, I was like, this is a terrible idea. Because for me, as a hotelier, I was like, I want to, if I want to be cheap, I'll stay in a motel. If I want to be expensive, I'll stay in a resort, etc. I mean, like I have lots of choices. But what these guys were onto was the fact that the millennials really loved the idea of not just staying, it wasn't just cost alone that was on their mindset. It was like they wanted to live in a place or stay in a place that felt like a local neighborhood, or a place that felt like it wasn't just a corporate, like an extended stay America or residence in a corporate, office park. So I think what they were onto was the idea that, people have been staying in each other's homes for a long time. VRBO started 13 or 14 years before Airbnb, just for second homes, often in resort locations. But Airbnb, what they did was popularize the idea that living in a home helps you feel more like a local, and you can get more space for less money. And it's better for extended stays, for longer stays. If you're staying for 2 weeks, either for business or pleasure, or if you have your family along with you, nice to have, a home with 3 bedrooms than get 3 different guest rooms in a hotel or a resort. The brilliance of Airbnb has been, more than anything, the idea that you create a web platform that's a marketplace that has both hosts and guests in it. And the key over time, and part of my role was to say, how do we improve the quality of the experience for the guests based upon improving the quality of our hosts, and get rid of the hosts that are not good, and then elevate super hosts. And the long story short is, here's the reason Airbnb is as successful as it is. The level of customer satisfaction for Airbnb guests based upon NPS, Net Promoter Score, is 50% higher than it is in the hotel industry. That is a shocking statistic. When I joined 10 years ago, that was not the case. But the process of weeding out bad hosts and matching a guest with the kind of host or listing that's the right fit for them based upon data and understanding guest needs, led Airbnb to becoming the sort of the dominant player in the hospitality or the lodging space today.
What's the one thing that, thanks, Chip, what's the one thing that you could really give to these, club leaders of your experience with Airbnb? These clubs are managing members in thousands and employees in the hundreds, and working through COVID and trying to grow and innovate themselves, not just being a country club of old people playing golf, but being innovative and place where young families want to go. And what's the one thing that you can give to them, the piece of advice to take their clubs throughout Florida to the next level?
Well, I think that two things. Number one is disruption happens when you weren't looking. So the hotel industry was not expecting Airbnb to come along. Borders Bookstore was not expecting Amazon to come along. Blockbuster Video was not expecting Netflix to come along. So there's a guy named, oh my gosh, I can't remember, one of the Intel founders, and Only the Paranoid Survive was the name of his book. I don't love the idea of having to be paranoid to surviving, because that's sort of like a very stressful way to look at your career. But I do think there's something to be said for the idea that if you don't innovate your product, if you don't address, as I've shown here, a model based upon human needs, you will get to a point where there are other alternatives that you didn't think were competitors that become competitors. For in the club business, that could be, oh, well, I'm a member of Inspirato, or I'm a member of some kind of, club, like a vacation club program that allows people to go and stay for extended stays elsewhere in the world and play golf in a bunch of other places, not just at their home club. And there's people are less loyal than they used to be. Let's just start with that. But I would say the most important thing when we talk about less loyalty is your employees. Your employees will be as loyal to you as you are to them. Now, there'll be individual situations where that's not the case, where you get burned by somebody who you've been loyal to, and then they decide to go elsewhere. But generally speaking, it's true. When employees feel like you're investing in them, they are so much more willing to stick around. And I can tell you that, having grown up in a club environment, a place called Virginia Country Club in Long Beach, California, where my grandfather was a member, my father was a member, my uncle was a member. The loyalty that our family felt was less to the club, less to the general manager. It was more to the favorite employees in that club, whether it was the woman, Polly, who served us lunch every day when we'd go there, or each day we'd go there, or it was the club pro that my dad loved getting golf lessons from, or it was the guy who ran the driving range, and so those relationships are really important. And when you have, as we have had lately, the Great Resignation, and you have a lot of turnover of staff, you don't realize as the club manager how that might affect your club members' relationship with their loyalty to you, because often they're loyal to your employees and they get disappointed when they have to build a new relationship. So I would just highly recommend that, Peak as a model is a way for you to remember that it's not the customer who comes first. It's not the club member who comes first. It's actually the employee who comes first. And if you actually invest in the employees, the customer will be really well taken care of.
Chip, I'm 52 years old. So when you talked about being 54, and that's kind of the start of my half of my modern elder, you kind of got my attention. There's people on the call that are under 54 and over 54. But tell us more about the Modern Elder Academy. Tell us more about being a modern elder and what we can do is, to embrace learning from elders within our club. I think clubs have a huge age gap between the elders and young people working at the club. What's some advice to get multi-generational people embracing each other's wisdom at work?
All right. Well, first of all, I actually think wisdom, we're in an interesting era. It was 25 years ago that Jack Welch at General Electric said, he introduced the idea of reverse mentoring. So how do the older people in the organization learn from the younger ones? And it was often around the internet and technology. I think that's still true. I think, one of the things I learned as the modern elder at Airbnb was that I could learn DQ, digital intelligence, from Brian, the CEO, and other younger people in the organization. I had over 100 mentees in my 7.5 years at Airbnb. Over 100 is a lot. And I could learn digital intelligence from them, and they could learn EQ from me. So they learned emotional intelligence from me around leadership, around strategic thinking, around how to think about your customer differently. So I think that, looking at how do we create mutual mentorship so that in organizations, we're always curious and learning. If you think of yourself as the older person and therefore you need to be the dispenser of wisdom, if all you do is dispense wisdom, you are no longer the wisdom seeker. You're just the wisdom keeper. And I actually think what's beautiful about the era we live in, and scary, is how much new stuff there is to learn every year, especially around technology and around business strategy and things like that. So the people I really admire, I admire Peter Drucker. Now he's no longer living, but he lived till his mid-90s. He wrote 2/3 of his 40 books after the age of 65. His whole point of view was every 2 years he would learn a new subject that had nothing to do with being a management theorist or business professor, and had everything to do with something he was passionate about. And so he would use that opportunity to say, okay, I'm going to go learn about, Japanese flower arranging, ikebana, or I'm going to learn about medieval war strategies. And being curious in life is like the elixir of creativity and innovation. What it does is it makes you more engaged and more, you have more passionate energy. So I would just say, my book, Wisdom at Work, The Making of a Modern Elder, for those who are interested in this, check that out. I also have a daily blog called Wisdom Well. And Wisdom Well is it's a daily blog on the Modern Elder Academy website, or you can just Google my name, Chip Conley, and Wisdom Well, and you'll find it. You get a free email from me every morning with a little microdose of wisdom. And, you can come to Baja and do a workshop, or we also have an MEA online, and we have a new workshop an online course, 8-week online course that starts on June 4th called Designing Your Purposeful Path to Work. That's got everybody from Nike CEO John Donahoe in it to Christian mystic Richard Rohr to Sherry Lansing, who was the most powerful woman in the film industry, but also Dan Pink, the author, Arthur Brooks, the author, Lynn Twist, she wrote The Soul of Money, Ronnie Lott, the NFL Hall of Famer, Michael Franti, famous musician. It's a really dynamite course. And I lead that, and that starts June 4th. And it's on the modernelderacademy.com website.
Chip, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. And sharing your wisdom, and totally appreciate it, and very thankful for you and our friendship. Our next session is actually July 6th, and that's with Ken Blanchard, my mentor. Please mark your calendars. July 6th is our next one, and after that is August 10th, which is Tim Sanders, who wrote the great book Love is a Killer App, former executive at Yahoo, and just a brilliant human being. So July 6th, Ken Blanchard, August 10th, Tim Sanders. Today's session with Chip Conley, the password is Peak, with capital P-E-A-K, AKA the title of his book that I love so much. The two books that if you want to get some more resources on Chip are Peak, P-E-A-K, and then also Making of the Modern Elder, Wisdom at Work is this last book, which is, I think, is brilliant. Beth Sargent, thank you so much for putting this together. I wish you a great day, and thank you so much for being part of the Heart-Led Leader webinar series. All the best.
The code is in the chat. The link, the code. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.